Hello, I'm Charles, and I'm going to be reading, as I've mentioned in my previous Tales of Terror from Reddit video, I'm going to read Sideways Stories from Wayside School. I'm going to read more of the book. And in case you ask, I'm filming this outside and I'm going to record myself reading the book outside, so please excuse any background noise you hear outside, such as wind, airplanes, any animals, etc. The reason why I'm recording outside is because not only am I still on my way to Arizona, I'm in the state of Arizona, I'm not in the town I'm living at yet. This is the only opportunity I have to make a video, so while I'm outside alone, I decided, hey, I have my book with me, and I'm not going to pass up this opportunity to make a video, so I'm making a video right now. Chapter 4. Sherry. Sherry had long eyelashes. She weighed only 49 pounds. She always wore a big red and blue overcoat with a hood. The overcoat weighed 35 pounds. The red part weighed 15 pounds. The blue part weighed 15 pounds. And the hood weighed 5 pounds. Her eyelashes weighed 1.5 pounds. She sat next to the window in Miss Jewel's class. She spent a lot of time just staring out the window, and Miss Jewels didn't mind. Miss Jewels said that a lot of people learn best when they stare out the window. Sherry often fell asleep in class. Miss Jewels didn't mind that either. She said that a lot of people do their best when learning when they're sleeping. Sherry spent all of her time either looking out the window or sleeping. Miss Jewels thought she was the best student in the class. One afternoon, it was very hot. All of the windows were open, yet Sherry still wore her red and blue overcoat. The heat made her very tired. Miss Jewels was teaching artimetric. Sherry pulled the hood up over her face, buried herself in the coat, and went to sleep. Miss Jewels said, "Kathy, Sherry is asleep." "That's good," said Miss Jewels. "She must be learning something." Miss Jewels continued with the lesson. Sherry began to snore. "Miss Jewels, Sherry is snoring," said Kathy. "Yes, I can hear her," said Miss Jewels. "She must be learning an awful lot today. I wish the rest of you could be like her." Sherry began to toss and turn. She flopped over the top of her desk and then rolled over on top of Kathy's desk. Then she rolled back the other way. Kathy screamed. Sherry rolled out the window. She was still sound asleep. As you know, Miss Jewel's class was on the 30th floor of Wayside School, so Sherry had a long way to go. Chapter 5. Todd. All of the children in Miss Jewel's class except Todd were talking and carrying on. Todd was thinking. Todd always thought before he spoke. When he got an idea, his eyes lit up. Todd finished thinking and began to speak. But before he said 2 words, Miss Jewels called him. "Todd," she said, "you know better than to talk in class. You must learn to work quietly, like the other children." She wrote his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Todd looked around in amazement. All of the other children who had been talking and screaming and fighting only seconds earlier were quietly working in their workbooks. Todd scratching his head. A child was given 3 chances in Miss Jewell's class. The first time he did something wrong, Miss Jewell wrote his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. The second time he did something wrong, she would put a check next to his name. And the third time he did something wrong, she circled the name. Todd reached into his desk and pulled out his workbook. He had only just started on it when he felt something tap him on the shoulder. It was Joy. "What page are you on?" Joy asked. "Page 4, Todd whispered. "I'm on page 11, said Joy. Todd didn't say anything. He didn't want to get into trouble. He just went back to work. 5 minutes later, Joy tapped him again. Todd ignored her. So Joy poked him in the back with her pencil. Todd pretended he didn't notice. Joy got up from her seat and sharpened her pencil. She came back and poked it in Todd's back. "What page are you on?" she asked. "Page 5, Todd answered. "Boy, are you dumb," said Joy. "I'm on page 29. It isn't a race," Todd whispered. 5 minutes later, Joy pulled Todd's hair and didn't let go until he turned around. "What page are you on?" she demanded. "Page 6, Todd answered as quietly as he could. "I'm on page 200, Joy shouted. Todd was very angry. "Will you please let me do my work and stop bothering me?" Miss Jules heard him. "Todd, what did I say about talking in class?" Todd scratched his head. Miss Jules put a check next to Todd's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Todd really tried to be good. He knew that if he talked one more time, Miss Jules would circle his name. Then he'd have to go home early at 12 o'clock on the kindergarten bus. Just as he had the day before and the day before that. In fact, there hadn't been a day since Miss Jules took over the class that she didn't send Todd home early. She said she did it for his own good. The other children went home at 2 o'clock. Todd wasn't really bad. He just always got caught. He really wanted to stay past 12 o'clock. He didn't want to find out what the class did from 12 to 2. But it didn't look as though this was going to be his day. It was only 10:30, and he already had 2 strikes against him. He sealed his lips and went back to work. There was a knock on the door. Miss Jules opened it. 2 men stepped in wearing masks and holding guns. "Give us all your money," they demanded. "All I have is a nickel," said Miss Jules. "I have a dime," said Mauricia. "I have 13 cents, said Leslie. "I have 4 cents, said Damien. "What kind of bank is this?" asked one of the robbers. "This is not a bank. It's a school," said Todd. "Can't you read?" "No," said the robbers. "Neither can I," said Todd. "Do you mean we walked all the way up 30 flights of stairs for nothing?" asked the robber. "Don't you have anything valuable?" Todd's eyes lit up. "We sure do," he said. "We have knowledge." He grabbed Joy's workbook and gave it to the robbers. "Knowledge is more valuable than money." "Thanks, kid," said one of the robbers. "Maybe I'll give up being a criminal and become a scientist," said the other. They left the room without hurting anybody. "Now I don't have a workbook," complained Joy. Miss Jules gave her a new one. Joy had to start all the way back at the beginning. "Hey Joy, what page are you on?" asked Todd. "Page 1, Joy sighed. I'm on page 8, laughed Todd triumphantly. Miss Jules heard him. She circled his name. Todd had 3 strikes against him. At 12 o'clock, he left the room to go home early on the kindergarten bus. But this time when he left, he was like a star baseball player leaving the field. All the children stood up, clapped their hands, and whistled. Todd scratched his head. Chapter 6. Bebe. Bebe was a girl with short brown hair, a little BB nose, totally tiny toes, and big brown eyes. Her full name was Bebe Gunn. She was the fastest drawer in Miss Jules' class. She could draw a cat in less than 45 seconds, a dog in less than 30, a flower in less than 8 seconds, but of course Bebe never drew just one dog or one cat or one flower. Art was from 12:30 to 1:30. Why, in that time, she could draw 50 cats, 100 flowers, 12 dogs, and several eggs or watermelons. It took her the same amount of time to draw a watermelon as an egg. Calvin sat next to Bebe. He didn't think she was very good at art. Why, it took him the whole period just to draw one airplane. So instead, she just helped Bebe. He was Bebe's assistant. As soon as Bebe would finish one masterpiece, Calvin would take it from her and set down a clean sheet of paper. Whenever her crayon ran low, Calvin was ready with a new crayon. That way, Bebe didn't have to waste any time, and in return, Bebe would draw 5 or 6 airplanes for Calvin. It was 12:30, time for art. Bebe was ready. On her desk was a sheet of yellow construction paper. In her hand was a green crayon. Calvin was ready. He held a stack of paper and a box of crayons. "Ready, Bebe?" said Calvin. "Ready, Calvin," said Bebe. "Okay," said Miss Jules. "Time for art." She had hardly finished her sentence when Bebe had already drawn a paper of a leaf. Calvin took it from her and put another piece of paper down. "Red," called Bebe. Calvin handed Bebe a red crayon. "Blue," called Bebe. He handed her a blue crayon. There were quite a pair. Their teamwork was remarkable. Bebe drew pictures as fast as Calvin could pick up the old paper and set down the new. A fish, an apple, 3 cherries. Bing, bing, bing. At 1:30, Miss Jules announced, "Okay, class, art is over." Bebe dropped her crayon and fell over on her desk. Calvin sighed and leaned back in his chair. He could hardly move. They had broken their old record. Bebe had drawn 378 pictures. They lay in a pile on Calvin's desk. Miss Jules walked in. "Calvin, did you draw all these pictures?" Calvin laughed. "No, I can't draw. Bebe drew them all." "Well then, what did you draw?" asked Miss Jules. "I didn't draw anything," said Calvin. "Why not?" "Don't you like art?" asked Miss Jules. "I love art," said Calvin. "That's why I didn't draw anything." Miss Jules did not understand. "It would have taken me the whole period to draw one picture," said Calvin, "and Bebe would only have been able to draw 100 pictures. But with the two of us working together, she was able to draw 378 pictures. That's a lot more art." Bebe and Calvin shook hands. "No," said Miss Jules. "That isn't how you measure art. It isn't how many pictures you have, but how good the pictures are. Why, a person could spend his whole life just drawing one picture of a cat. In that time, I'm sure Bebe could draw 1,000,000 cats. 2,000,000, said Bebe. Miss Jules continued, but if that one picture is better than each of Bebe's 2,000,000, then the person has produced more art than Bebe. Bebe looked as if she was going to cry. She picked up all the pictures from Calvin's desk and threw them in the garbage. Then she ran from the room. I thought her pictures were good, said Calvin. He reached into the garbage pail and took out a crumbled up picture of an airplane. Bebe walked outside into the playground. Louis, the art teacher, spotted her. Where are you going? He asked. I'm going to draw a picture of a cat, said Bebe. Will you bring it to school and show it to me tomorrow? Asked Louis. Tomorrow, laughed Bebe. By tomorrow, I doubt if I'll be finished with one whisker. Chapter 7. Calvin. Calvin had a big round face. Calvin, said Miss Jules, I want you to take this note to Miss Zarves for me. Miss Zarves? Asked Calvin. Yes, Miss Zarves, said Mrs. Jules. You know where she is, don't you? Yes, said Calvin. She's on the 19th floor. That's right, Calvin, said Miss Jules. Take it to her. Calvin didn't move. Well, what are you waiting for? Asked Miss Jules. She's on the 19th floor. Yes, we have already established that fact, said Miss Jules. The 19th story, Calvin repeated. Yeah, Calvin, the 19th story, said Miss Jules. Now take it to her before I lose my patience. But Miss Jules, said Calvin. Now, Calvin, said Miss Jules. Unless you would rather go home on the kindergarten bus. Yes, ma'am, said Calvin. Slowly he walked out the door. Terence laughed. Take it to the 19th story. Give it to Miss Zarves, hooted Myron. Have fun on the 19th story, called Jason. Calvin stood outside the door to the classroom. He didn't know where to go. As you know, when the builder built Wayside School, he accidentally built it sideways. But he also forgot to build the 19th floor. He built the 18th and the 20th, but no 19th. He said he was very sorry. But there was also no Miss Zarves. Miss Zarves taught the class on the 19th story. Since there was no 19th story, there was no Miss Zarves. And besides that, as if Calvin didn't have enough problems, there was no note. Miss Jules had never given Calvin the note. Boy, is this great, Calvin thought. Just great. I'm supposed to take a note that I don't have to a teacher who doesn't exist, and who teaches on a story that was never built. He didn't know what to do. He walked down to the 18th story, then back to the 20th, and then back down to the 18th, and back up to the 20th. There was no 19th floor, there never was a 19th floor, and there never will be a 19th story. Calvin walked down to the administration office. He decided to put the note in Miss Zarves' mailbox, but there wasn't one of those either. That Calvin didn't bother Calvin too much. However, since he didn't have a note, he looked out the window and saw Louis, the yard teacher, shooting baskets. Louis will know what to do, he thought. Calvin went outside. "Hey, Louis," Calvin called. "Hi, Calvin," said Louis. He tossed him the basketball. Calvin dribbled up and took a shot. He missed. Louis tipped it in. "Do you want to play a game?" Louis asked. "I don't have time," said Calvin. "I have to deliver a note to Miss Zarves up on the 19th story." "Then what are you doing all the way down here?" Louis asked. "There is no 19th story," said Calvin. "Then where is Miss Zarves?" asked Louis. "There is no Miss Zarves," said Calvin. "What are you going to do with the note?" asked Louis. "There is no note," said Calvin. "I understand," said Louis. "That's good," said Calvin, "because I sure don't." "It's very simple," said Louis. "You're not supposed to take no notes to no teachers. You already have done it." Calvin still didn't understand. "I'll just have to tell Miss Jules that I couldn't deliver the note," he said. "That's good," said Louis. "The truth is always best. Besides, I don't understand what I said either." Calvin walked back up the 30 flights of stairs to Miss Jules' class. "Thank you very much, Calvin," said Miss Jules. Calvin said, Miss Jules interrupted him. "But this very important note." "That was a very important note, and I'm glad I was able to count on you." "Yes, but you see," said Calvin. "You delivered the note to Miss Zarth on the 19th story," asked Jason. "How'd you do it?" "What do you mean, how did he do it?" asked Miss Jules. "He gave Miss Zarth the note. Some people, Jason, are responsible." "But you see, Miss Jules," Calvin said. "The note was very important," said Miss Jules. "I told Miss Zarves not to meet me for lunch." "Don't worry," said Calvin. "She won't." "Good," said Miss Jules. "I have a coffee can full of Tootsie Roll Pops on my desk. You may help yourself to one for being such a good messenger." "Thanks," said Calvin. "But really, it was nothing." Coming up next, Sideways Stories from Wayside School Part 3. Keep it here